Okay, good evening, everyone. As Robin said, I'm the City Councillor, represent the centre of the city, and was leader of the council until last year. And I am, as Robin said, the chair of the City Deal Assembly, which I will explain a little bit more as we go on. The purpose of this map is really to sort of indicate figuratively that the City Deal is about more than the City of Cambridge, and in fact this is one of the breakthroughs that the deal represented, is an attempt to try and address the governance of the area, not only for the city but also for the, one could call it something like the hinterland of the city. And in administrative terms we're talking about the boundary around the city, but also the boundary around the outer side of South Cambridgeshire. So those two pieces of geography fitting together. And as you saw I think in the newspaper only recently, you know, the logic for that is the huge interdependence that exists both ways between both areas in terms of people travelling to work or study or shop or have recreation. And so there is a certain natural unit that exists around this, because it exists far more around South Cambridgeshire and the city than it does between any of the other pairs of local authorities in the area. And it's what the government has started to call city regions, in our case, the city itself and the hinterland. So what I was going to examine, this is sort of City Deal 101. We're going to be talking at quite a general level. I was one of the people who negotiated the City Deal and was leader of the City Council, so I know something about the why it's as it is and how it's organised, and have a role in how it's organised today. I'm going to talk about exactly what it is, how it's run, what the transport programme within it looks like, and look at some of the benefits and the challenges. The question, what is the City Deal? It requires a little bit of complexity, because it's a deal, yes, but it's a deal at two levels. It's a deal between the local partners involved in the deal, which is the three local authorities responsible for the geography, which is the City Council, South Cambridgeshire District Council and the County Council, coming together with the University of Cambridge and the business community to agree about what it wanted to negotiate with the government. So that was step one. Those five organisations coming together and deciding that they could see things in sufficiently similar ways to negotiate together with the government. And then the second level of this obviously is that negotiation between that group of local partners and the government. And that was a process which went on over about 2 years. It was an extraordinarily intensive process, meeting civil servants, politicians, presenting to cabinet committees and the rest, before we came out with our agreement. So, from the point of view of central government, the one party to this deal, what did this represent? Well, from their point of view, it was primarily a means of locking in this area's contribution to economic growth. I mean, it was no frills. That was what the government was about. It wasn't about handouts. It was really looking for means of locking in the good things that we were, are and can do in the future for the national economy. And with the track record of the Cambridge phenomenon, there was every reason for the government in the aftermath of the recession to ensure that light didn't get extinguished and that it could burn stronger. And there was every reason to see that Cambridge, the sort of industry and employment base it represents, had a contribution to play in rebalancing the economy away from the City of London and financial services and more towards technological innovation. So that's the context in which they were approaching this. We focused them on the constraints that we felt the area faced, and they recognised particularly the transport infrastructure constraint, and they agreed to grant up to £500 million for us to invest locally in 3 tranches over 15 years. And the first of those tranches began in the 1st of April this year. The second and third tranches are contingent on independent evaluations in 2019 towards the end of the first 5-year period, and 2024 towards the end of the second 5-year period, assessments of the progress of our programme and its impact on the local economy. So the sense is that towards the end of the first 5 years, it's going to be quite difficult to see the effect of anything on the economy because it probably won't have been built much before that. So it's going to look more like checking that our plans were achieved according to how we had expected, value for money and those sort of things. The second evaluation, 2024, where there's a bit more distance, lots of the money will have been spent, and there would be reason to believe there could be some noticeable impact on the local economy, then that will be measured at that stage. The government also expected the local partners, the 5 partners, to work increasingly closely together to deliver this transport programme, but where they were also giving less help, they also expected us to work together in relation to the housing shortage and on skills. But I'm going to talk mainly about the transport part of this. The perspective of the local partners, the other side of this deal, they are expected to provide additional funding to go with this 500 million, and they do that primarily from the contributions that come from development sites being released, and that would, we expect, make available a potential total pot over the 15 years of somewhere between 500 million and £1 billion. So some very big numbers indeed. We also agreed, from the local perspective, to do what we could to accelerate our housing plans. And as you know, they're considerable. There's 33,000 new homes envisaged in the draft local plans that are still awaiting approval, and it may be more than that when they get approval. And that would be something like a 30% population increase. So the government had an interest in us working together to ensure those plans got realised. And the availability of significant transport investment, you might ask, how does transport help with that? Well, the availability of the transport investment has the potential to speed up some of those development plans for housing, for jobs, and to make them possible even, because the infrastructure to reach some of the developments is obviously a critical factor in them being realised. And South Cambridgeshire also committed to add a further 1,000 new homes on what they call rural exception sites around the villages, on top of their existing plans. We committed to move forward. Next time there were local plans to be prepared, we committed to, instead of having one local plan for South Cambridgeshire and another local plan for the City of Cambridge, we committed to have a single local plan on which the representatives from both areas would work together, which eliminates a lot of the untidiness about that exists about organisations talking to each other rather than sitting right from the start around the same table. And as well as bringing that local planning together in under one governance, they would also we also committed to bring strategic transport planning to that same table, so that we would end the situation which has historically existed, where the strategic planning authority has been the county council, and the local planning authorities have been the second tier district and city. And that they would be brought together under one of these newfangled things called a combined authority, which would have a legal entity aspect to it, and we're waiting for the government to legislate for that, to make that real. But that's the time at which everything you see in the city deal stops being a sort of a joint committee and starts having an entity of its own, with its own bank account and the potential to have its own officers as well. We also, as I said, accepted a challenge to improve skills training in the area by doing more to ensure it was aligned to what employers needed, and involve schools and employers with that. But I'm not going to detain us with that now. So how is the city deal run? Decision making is the responsibility of this group of people called the Executive Board, which is 5 people, representatives of the 3 councils, their political leaders, together with a representative of the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership, business community, and a representative of the University of Cambridge. The board member from the LEP is John Bridge, just so you can relate things to what you read in the newspapers, and the representative of the University of Cambridge is Jeremy Sanders, who's one of the pro-vice chancellors. So they are accountable for the ultimate decision making. They have been charged with doing that by consensus. The people who have the votes, though, are the 3 elected people. The other 2 are there in a partner capacity, advisory capacity. And so the 3 council leaders need to be seeking unanimity on the decisions that get taken, which was intended as a method to ensure that the rural area didn't dictate to the city and the city didn't dictate to the rural area what actually was decided, and it was a mechanism that was put there to achieve that. Now that group receives advice and recommendations from the Assembly, which is the body that I chair, in addition to elected members from the 3 councils, which come in politically proportionate numbers. There are these representatives, 3 from the business community, where you see that we have some quite impressive people sharing ownership for this at this level, from AstraZeneca, from Marshalls, and the Cambridge Network, which embraces a lot of the smaller technology companies. And from the academic sector, which I came under the nomination of the University of Cambridge, they chose to nominate someone from ARU, from the Cambridge Regional College, and from the Cambridge University Hospitals, which obviously brings with it the broad interest about the biomedical campus. Quite an impressive array of people have been included in this in order to give advice to the board. Currently, both bodies meet about a fortnight apart on a monthly basis, and the Assembly will see the same agenda, same reports that will later go to the board, and the Assembly gets the chance to say, we really support this, make sure you vote for it, make sure that's part of what you decide, but this we don't like so much, please don't do that, or do it in a different way. And that is how that works. So the arrows at the side indicate that there are multiple influences on all of this process. The officers, in transport terms, that's mainly from the county council, support both the executive and the Assembly. There are a whole load of other councillors on all 3 councils who are not in these 2 bodies here. They obviously are briefed and have an influence over what people go along and say at the Assembly and the board. There are residents and other stakeholders, such as yourselves in the cycling campaign, who use frequently, I'm very happy to say frequently, the opportunity to come along to the Assembly to make statements, ask questions, and drop ideas in front of us. And that is exactly the purpose of having this Assembly, that it is the funnel through which people, for whatever reason, can drop their point of view into the decision-making process. So what's key to appreciate about the objectives of the transport programme? Two things really. One, that it's to be focused on connectivity between parts of the Cambridge cluster, university departments, science and research parks, and connectivity between new housing and jobs, the people who work on in those places. And that's how we persuaded the government to give us this money, and that's really how we have to invest it. Otherwise, one or other of these tranches isn't going to be there when we want it, because they're seeing we're not doing what we said we would do in the deal. So it has to be something that's related to connecting jobs with homes, connecting up and making efficient communications between different parts of the employed community. The other key aspect is that right from the start in the City deal, investments have to be focused on making public transport and cycling and walking the modes of transport of choice. So this is absolutely embedded in the City deal, that it is about sustainable transport, improving the sustainable transport options in the area. And so the route to addressing congestion and connectivity right from the beginning is set in that direction. And so no surprise that the schemes that we expect to look at are all based on that notion of improving public transport, improving cycling, improving walking. So the conscious intention, right from the beginning, it's part of what we're there for, is to address congestion by attracting travellers to those modes by better, healthier and safer journey times, and offering them more dedicated space and more priority. So a list of the first 5 years programme. This was adopted in January, and these are the schemes which many of them are about the radial access to the city from outside the city. The Madding Road corridor, 4 to 8, the 1307 corridor, Milton Road, Histon Road. We then have the cycling related ones, or the purely cycling related schemes, I should say, the Chisholm Trail and the cross-city cycling routes, which were decided at the same stage, and then city centre transport improvements, which are addressing more specifically the problem of congestion actually within the built-up area of the city. There is a time scale for all of these projects. The process involves releasing options for each of these schemes into a public consultation stage. And where there are options, there will be a second phase of consultation when an option has been chosen. But the thing that we've been doing this year is receiving the first definition of options for each of these projects, so that they can flow forward into the public domain for consultation. And so the first of those that has got almost that far is the one on the top, the A428 Maddingley Road corridor, which we approved for release and consultation at our June and July meetings, and the expectation is that that consultation will start in later this month. In fact, it's already September. So that was the first off the block, and then the second off the block was the Chisholm Trail and the cross-city cycling improvements, and they were agreed for release to consultation in July and August meetings, and I'm not sure, but Mike probably will be able to say when they're going to appear in physical form for people to comment on. So after that, now we're up to date in a sense now. We expect to see options ready for consultation on the Milton Road corridor, on the Histon Road corridor, and the city centre transport improvements in October and November meetings, and on the 1307 corridor in November and December meetings. So you see this is a very tightly packed programme of major schemes having their options brought forward over a very narrow space of time. The reason these schemes were placed into the first wave, first tranche of the programme, is that we have to remember this system of the government checking that we did what we intended to do, and then ultimately that there was an impact on the economy. Well, of course, you need to look at schemes in the first tranche which are reasonably swiftly able to be implemented. If you choose schemes in your first tranche that take 5 years thinking and consulting about because no one's ever done any work on them before, then clearly you're going to have not much to show at the end of the first 5 years. So schemes which would require a very lengthy lead time or weren't required yet in terms of supporting things in the local plans will be given place in the second and third tranches, but work on them may start well in advance of that. Not yet, but soon. So the choices that exist in these consultations are going to be very controversial. You've seen material about this in the press. You have an energising debate about different approaches, different theories, different conceptual ideas about how to achieve the objectives we're trying to achieve. And you also have the voices of people who are affected because it's in their local area that it's happening. And it amounts to change, and whenever that happens, there is always voices for people who would rather not often, but also sometimes those who support it. So this is going to be a very controversial process in which there will be many different, sometimes competing voices to be heard, and for the city deal governance to somehow deal with. So the next thing I just wanted to touch on was this question of the city centre. This is going to be amongst, I think, the most tricky of all of the aspects of this programme. Although not everyone whose travel we're going to accommodate wants to touch the city centre at all, to some degree the city centre is where all the pieces need to fit together. And a lot of the impact of the other schemes make it important that we have a solution for what regime we want to manage capacity in the city centre. So in crude terms, if you make it very easy through all these radial routes for people to get to the city centre, then there needs to be the means of accommodating and providing space when they get there. So it's very important. She's an integral centrepiece to the whole programme, and it's probably going to require a rather different approach to the whole question of consultation. This is shortly going to be the start of a process to identify possible ways forward, and we're going to start sifting through all the different regimes and public interventions there are to deal with congestion, and isolate those ones that have relevance to us here. And there are some specifics about here in relation to the constrained environment that we're trying to serve, even if someone wanted to, it's not really possible to envisage sort of massive amounts of more tarmac in the built-up area of the city. And so that presents this huge challenge of how to use space and how to share it out. We also plan to talk to the major generators of traffic within the city. So that's the people like the very big employers, the retail trade, to see what sort of contributions they can make to help this problem that we've got. And was talking recently to the business improvement district in the city centre, and they are already working on a scheme of sharing delivery vehicles into the city from the perimeter, which is exactly the sort of thing we're looking for, and the sooner the better. But it's likely that we aren't going to be able to exist purely from those contributions. We are going to need some substantial interventions as well. I think the diagram indicates here the sort of things, the sort of general categories of intervention that you could imagine being options for us here. The restrictions on private vehicles, the sort of thing that means is the current access controls in the core traffic scheme, like the rising bollards. Those bollards could be further out from the city centre. That's the sort of notion that's implied by that green square there. Demand management, that could be such things as fiscal incentives, like workplace parking levy, where employers are providing parking within the city for people coming to work, or congestion charging, or it could be physical ways of managing demand, such as introducing additional restrictions on parking in the city. And in the red quadrant, capacity enhancements, that is difficult to see that capacity enhancements can be secured in many other ways other than at the expense of cars in the city centre itself, because the space simply doesn't exist. And that's where this sensitive business of allocating road space tends to be at its most controversial. But in practice, that means providing more space for the sustainable options. And if total space doesn't increase, that's less for the other. And behavioural measures would be different means of encouraging the use of other modes of transport than the private motor vehicle. So, moving right on. Okay, I'm nearly finished. In conclusion, I think everyone involved in this sees the city deal as an exciting development. Although we can always ask for more from the government, and there are people who would say, oh, I'm not sure about the city deal, it should be more. That is fine, and whenever more is available, then we should be going in there to get it. But we have been successful in winning one of the most generous city deals that government negotiated with anywhere, especially relative to our size. And I think it's true to say that in recent years we haven't had the prospect of undertaking such a major investment programme as this in transport infrastructure. So there is a certain excitement and anticipation about this. It's essential to help tackle the daily problems we all experience, the time taken in commuting, the difficulty in finding affordable housing that's accessible for work, recruitment challenges. A lot of this all comes back to the challenge of transport. It's necessary to provide better infrastructure if we're going to retain the high quality jobs that have been brought to the area and generated within the area, and keep on attracting them and avoid local grown companies having to migrate to expand. And it's critical that we respect the place we're trying to improve, our historic buildings, the green environment, all the other ingredients that make Greater Cambridge successful and special. These are things that we want to nurture as part of this process, not to challenge. So we have to be very careful to work with the grain rather than across it and even enhance the grain. and it's not going to be easy to satisfy all of these needs. I mean, it's a huge, huge series of challenges here, but we do at least have the means now, and we have the opportunity to get this right.